I stood frozen in my parents' living room, staring at the glossy wedding invitation in my hand while my mother's words hung in the air like poison. We've decided to use Emma's college fund for Amber's wedding. It's just sitting there anyway, and your sister deserves her dream day. The invitation slipped from my fingers, landing on the hardwood floor with a soft tap that echoed through my suddenly hollow chest. Emma's college fund. My daughter's future. The money my late husband had left specifically for her education before cancer took him 3 years ago. What? My voice came out as a whisper, though inside I was screaming. That's not your money to use. That's Emma's inheritance from her father. My mother's face hardened, the way it always did when she was challenged. Behind her, my father stared intently at his newspaper, refusing to look up. My younger sister Amber picked at her manicured nails, her massive diamond engagement ring catching the light. Family helps family, Caroline, my mother said flatly. You're being selfish. It's not like Emma is going to college tomorrow. She's only 15. You have years to save up again. I felt something crack inside me, the final thread of trust I'd managed to maintain with my family despite years of being the afterthought, the responsible one who never got the spotlight. The one who married beneath her station, according to my status-obsessed parents, while golden child Amber dated only men with the right connections and bank accounts. You had no right, I whispered, tears burning behind my eyes. No right at all. 3 weeks later, I sat in my small suburban home, surrounded by financial paperwork and legal documents, still reeling from the betrayal. The house felt emptier than usual with Emma at her weekend science camp. The silence gave me too much space to think about how my family had always treated us. When Mark died, my parents had offered minimal emotional support. They'd never fully accepted him, the high school music teacher who had swept me off my feet during my senior year of college. He'll never provide the life you deserve, my mother had said. Now, they were taking the little financial security he'd managed to leave for our daughter. My phone buzzed with a text from Amber. Mom wants to know if you're coming to my bridal shower next weekend. She said you haven't RSVP'd. I set the phone down without responding. My sister had always been the princess, the one whose dreams and desires came first. When we were children, my dance recitals were missed for Amber's pageants. My high school graduation party was scaled back because Amber needed braces. Now, as adults, nothing had changed. The inheritance in question was modest $45,000, but it represented Mark's final wish for Emma. He'd worked extra jobs, saved every penny, even through his treatments, to ensure she could pursue her dreams of becoming a doctor. I'd been the custodian of that money, keeping it in a bank account connected to my parents' financial advisor, a decision I now recognized as my greatest mistake. You're overreacting, my father had said on the phone yesterday. Emma can get student loans like everyone else. Amber's wedding is happening now. I stared at the family photo on my mantle, taken at Christmas 2 years ago. The last holiday before everything fell apart. In it, we were all smiling, but I could see the truth now, how my parents stood closer to Amber, how Emma and I were slightly apart, always on the periphery of the family circle. The unfairness of it all burned like acid in my chest. What do you mean you've already spent half of it? I gripped my cell phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Around me, my coworkers at the real estate office pretended not to hear my increasingly desperate tone. The venue required a non-refundable deposit, my mother explained calmly, as if discussing the weather rather than the theft of my daughter's future. And the designer dress Amber fell in love with was the last one in her size. We had to act quickly. I stepped outside into the parking lot, the summer heat hitting me like a physical blow. You need to return the dress and cancel the venue. That money isn't yours to spend. My mother's laugh was cold. Don't be ridiculous, Caroline. It's done. Besides, your father and I have supported you plenty over the years. Remember who helped with your down payment? Who watched Emma when you couldn't afford childcare? Each word was a deliberate twist of the knife. The help they'd given always came with strings, with reminders of my supposed inadequacy, with comparisons to Amber's more successful life choices. That evening, Emma found me crying at the kitchen table. My beautiful, brilliant daughter with her father's kind eyes and curious mind. She'd already been researching colleges, dreaming of medical school. "Mom? What's wrong?" She sat beside me, her gangly teenage frame awkward yet graceful. I couldn't tell her. Couldn't bear to see her face when she learned that her grandparents, who she already felt distant from, had stolen her future to fund her aunt's extravagant wedding to a man she'd known for less than a year. "It's just work stress, honey," I lied, wiping my eyes. "Is this about the money Grandma and Grandpa took?" she asked quietly. I froze. "You know about that?" Emma nodded. "I overheard you on the phone yesterday." "Mom, it's okay. I can get scholarships. I don't need." "No," I cut her off, something hardening inside me. "It's not okay. It will never be okay." That night, after Emma went to bed, I made a call to my college roommate Jennifer, now a financial attorney. It was time to fight back. "I'm taking legal action if you don't return Emma's money," I announced, standing in my parents' elegant dining room where they'd summoned me to discuss things like adults. Amber sat beside them, her fiancé Todd at her side, his arm draped possessively around her shoulder. My mother's teacup clattered against its saucer. "You wouldn't dare create a family scandal. Think of what people would say." "I don't care what people would say," I fired back, my voice steadier than I expected. "That money was Mark's final gift to his daughter. He worked through chemo to save it. Now you're being dramatic." My father waved his hand dismissively. "Mark would have wanted to support family. Don't you dare tell me what my husband would have wanted." The words came out as a growl, surprising even me. Amber finally spoke, her voice small. "Car, please understand. This wedding is everything to me. I've dreamed of this since I was little." "And Emma's dreamed of becoming a doctor since she was 8, I countered. "The difference is, her father set aside money specifically for her dream. No one set aside money for your wedding." Todd, who'd been silently watching the exchange, cleared his throat. "Your parents mentioned this was just a temporary situation. We'd pay it back after the honeymoon." I laughed bitterly. "With what? Your startup that hasn't made a profit in 3 years? The trust fund you've already blown through? That money isn't a loan. It's theft." "That's enough." My father slammed his hand on the table. "You've always been jealous of your sister. Always resented that she's made better choices than you. If you'd married someone with actual prospects instead of a teacher with a guitar, you wouldn't be in this position." Something inside me snapped. The years of being second best, of watching my parents favor Amber, of swallowing my pain to keep the peace, it all came crashing down. "I'm done," I said quietly, a strange calm washing over me. "You've made your choice clear. Now I'll make mine." I walked out, ignoring their calls for me to come back and be reasonable. For the first time in my life, I was being perfectly reasonable. I was protecting my daughter from the people who had failed us again and again. The photo album lay open on my lap, pages filled with memories that now seemed tainted. There I was at 10 years old, holding my science fair blue ribbon, standing alone because my parents had been at Amber's dance competition. There was my high school graduation, my parents looking distracted because Amber had thrown a tantrum about not being the center of attention. Then came the photos that hurt the most, my small wedding to Mark in the local park. Beautiful in its simplicity, but missing half my family because my mother had scheduled an unavoidable charity commitment the same weekend. Contrast that with the professional engagement photos of Amber and Todd that my parents had proudly displayed on their mantle, already framed before the ink was dry. "Your mother and I just want what's best for you," my father had said when I announced my engagement to Mark. And he isn't it. Mark had been kind, brilliant, and passionate about music and teaching. He'd made me laugh, supported my career, and been the most loving father to Emma. But he hadn't come from money, hadn't had the right connections, hadn't fit my parents' vision of success. When he got sick, my parents had offered financial help with strings attached, suggesting I use the opportunity to reconsider my life choices. I'd refused, maintaining my dignity even as medical bills mounted. "They've always been like this," I whispered to the empty room. "I've just been making excuses for them." My phone lit up with a text from my mother. "We need to discuss your behavior. Come for dinner Sunday." No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the expectation that I would fall in line as I always had. The memories swirled: Christmases where Amber's pile of gifts dwarfed mine, birthdays where my celebrations were afterthoughts, the constant comparisons and subtle put-downs. The message had always been clear. Amber was the daughter they cherished. I was the daughter they tolerated. I closed the album and made another call to Jennifer. "You did what?" Jennifer stared at me over her desk, legal pad in hand, her expression shifting from professional to personal concern. "I created a trust for Emma 3 months ago," I repeated. "After Mark's insurance paid out, I put most of it in there. I kept only a small portion in the account my parents knew about." Jennifer sat back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Caroline Bennett, you brilliant woman. So when your parents took the money, they only got about $12,000, not the $45,000 they think they took," I confirmed. "The rest is safe in a trust that only Emma can access for educational purposes when she turns 18. It had been Mark's idea originally. In his final weeks, sensing my parents' true nature better than I ever had, he'd made me promise to protect Emma's future. "Your parents will try to control her through money like they've done to you," he'd warned. "Don't let them." Jennifer reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "Your husband was a smart man." "He was," I agreed, tears forming. "But I still need to get that $12,000 back. And more importantly, I need to finally stand up to my family." Jennifer's expression grew serious. "The legal case is straightforward. You were the custodian of those funds, and they had no right to access them without your permission. But Caroline, the personal battle will be harder. Are you ready for what this means?" Really ready. The question hung in the air. Was I ready to potentially cut ties with my family? To challenge the dynamic that had defined my entire life? To show Emma that sometimes standing up for yourself means standing alone? "I've spent my whole life trying to earn their approval," I said slowly. "Trying to be good enough. But I realize now that in their eyes, I never will be. And that's not my failure, it's theirs." Jennifer nodded. "Then let's proceed. But first, I want you to talk to someone." She scribbled a name and number on her notepad. "This is Dr. Melissa Chen. She specializes in family trauma and rebuilding boundaries. You'll need more than legal support for this journey." I took the paper, feeling a strange lightness. For the first time in my life, I was choosing my own path, not the one of least resistance that would keep peace in the family. I was choosing Emma and myself. "I'll call her today," I promised. "Ms. Bennett, based on these bank records, it appears your parents have been skimming from your daughter's account for years." The forensic accountant Jennifer had hired laid out spreadsheets across the conference table. I stared at the numbers, my hands trembling. "What do you mean, skimming?" I asked, though the sickness in my stomach told me I already knew. "Small withdrawals, usually under $1,000, dating back to when the account was established after your husband's death. The total is approximately $18,000, in addition to the recent large withdrawal for your sister's wedding." I felt as if I'd been physically struck. The betrayal was deeper and longer standing than I'd imagined. My parents hadn't just taken Emma's money for Amber's wedding, they'd been systematically stealing from my daughter for years. They used their position as co-signatories to funnel money, Jennifer explained gently. The account was set up through their financial advisor, giving them access they shouldn't have had. "But why?" My voice cracked. "They have plenty of money." The accountant cleared his throat. "Based on their financial records, which we subpoenaed, your parents have been living beyond their means for some time. Your father's investments took several hits in recent years, and they've been maintaining appearances by accumulating significant debt. The truth crashed down on me like a wave. The luxury cars, the country club membership, the lavish gifts for Amber, it had all been a facade. My parents' obsession with status had driven them to steal from their own granddaughter. And Amber? Did she know? Jennifer and the accountant exchanged glances. There are several transfers to her personal account, the accountant confirmed. Whether she knew the source of the funds is unclear. I sat back, mind reeling. The perfect family image they'd cultivated, the narrative that I was the struggling single mother while they were the successful, generous patriarchs, it had all been a lie. Caroline, Jennifer said gently, this changes the legal landscape significantly. This isn't just about recovering the wedding funds anymore. This is fraud. The weight of the decision before me was crushing. Pursuing this meant potentially sending my parents to jail, destroying our family forever, exposing their financial fraud to everyone in our social circle. I need to think, I whispered. But deep down, I already knew what I had to do. The truth, no matter how painful, needed to come to light. Mom, whatever you decide, I'm with you, Emma said, sitting cross-legged on my bed as I packed an overnight bag. We were headed to my friend Rachel's lake house for the weekend, needing space from the avalanche of calls and texts from my family since I'd missed Amber's bridal shower. I paused, folding a sweater with deliberate care. Even if it means no relationship with your grandparents? With Aunt Amber. Emma's expression was far too mature for her 15 years. They stole from me, Mom. Not just money, but the security Dad wanted me to have. And they've been hurting you my whole life. My throat tightened. I should have protected you better. You did protect me, Emma insisted, moving to hug me. The trust fund proves that. And now you're teaching me something more important than money, that we don't let people abuse us, even if they're family. At the lake house, surrounded by the peaceful waters and Rachel's unconditional support, I made my decision. I called Jennifer. I want to proceed with the fraud case, I said firmly. But first, I want to give them one chance to make this right. The next day, back home, I drafted an email to my parents and Amber. I laid out everything, the evidence of their systematic theft, the betrayal of trust, the years of emotional manipulation. I offered terms, full repayment of all stolen funds plus interest, a public apology to Emma, and family counseling if we were to have any relationship moving forward. If you refuse these terms, I wrote, I will file charges for fraud and theft. This is not a threat, it's a boundary I am finally setting. I hit send and felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for approval or acceptance. I was demanding respect for myself and for my daughter. Whatever happened next, Emma and I would face it together, stronger for having stood our ground. The law office conference room was silent except for the occasional rustle of papers. My parents sat across from me, their lawyer beside them. Jennifer sat at my right, Emma at my left, her presence a statement in itself. My mother looked older than she had just weeks ago, her carefully maintained facade showing cracks. My father couldn't meet my eyes. Before we begin, Jennifer said, I want to clarify that this meeting is a courtesy. My client has enough evidence to proceed with criminal charges, but she's offering a civil resolution. My parents' lawyer, Mr. Harrington, nodded stiffly. My clients understand the gravity of the situation and wish to resolve this matter privately. Where's Amber? I asked, noticing my sister's absence. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. She's on her honeymoon. The wedding was last weekend. The wedding had proceeded without us, with Emma's stolen money funding the celebration. Something cold settled in my chest. You still held the wedding? Even after knowing what that money was? My mother fidgeted with her wedding ring. We couldn't cancel. The deposits were non-refundable. What my clients mean, Mr. Harrington interjected, is that they recognize their error in judgment and are prepared to make full restitution. He slid a document across the table, a promissory note for the full amount identified by the forensic accountant, plus interest, to be paid within 30 days. And the apology to Emma? I prompted. My mother's eyes flashed with that familiar defiance, but my father placed a restraining hand on her arm. Emma, he said, finally looking at his granddaughter, what we did was wrong. We took advantage of our position as co-signatories on your account and misused funds that were meant for your future. I can offer explanations about financial pressures and family obligations, but they would be excuses, not justifications. We are deeply sorry. Emma nodded once, her expression unreadable. And the family counseling? I asked. My mother's mask finally cracked. Is that really necessary? We've admitted fault, we're repaying the money. Can't we put this unpleasantness behind us? That's your answer then, I said quietly. You still don't understand what this is really about. It was never just about the money. I stood, gathering my papers. We'll accept the financial restitution. The promissory note seems in order, Jennifer. My attorney nodded. As for our family relationship, I continued, that will require more than a signed document. When you're ready to truly acknowledge the decades of favoritism, manipulation, and emotional damage, you know how to reach me. Until then, we need distance. As we walked out, Emma's hand firmly in mine, I heard my mother begin to cry, perhaps the first genuine emotion she'd shown in years. 6 months later, Emma and I stood in the kitchen of our new home, unpacking dishes. The modest 3-bedroom house was further from the city, in a quiet neighborhood with good schools. The move had been part of our fresh start. Dr. Chin says Grandma called her again, Emma mentioned, carefully arranging glasses on a shelf. She wants to schedule a family session. I nodded, unsurprised. My mother had been persistent since our confrontation, moving through stages of anger, denial, bargaining, and now, perhaps, genuine remorse. My father had reached out separately, his messages more thoughtful, acknowledging his role in enabling the family dynamic. Amber had returned from her honeymoon to the fallout of our family rupture and the revelation of our parents' financial troubles. Her marriage was already showing strain under the weight of these realities. She'd sent a handwritten letter of apology last month, imperfect but seemingly sincere. Do you want to see them? I asked Emma, careful not to influence her decision. She considered this, her father's thoughtful nature evident in her measured response. I think I do, but on our terms, with Dr. Chen present, and not at their house. I smiled at my daughter's wisdom. That sounds reasonable. Later that evening, we sat on our new porch swing, watching the sunset. Emma was scrolling through college brochures on her tablet, her trust fund intact and growing, her future secure despite the family storm we'd weathered. Mom, she said, looking up from the screen. I'm proud of us. I put my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Me too, sweetheart. We had lost the illusion of a perfect extended family, but we had gained something far more valuable: authenticity, boundaries, and self-respect. We had stopped accepting scraps of affection and demanded the full meal of genuine love and respect. The healing wasn't complete, might never be fully complete, but we were no longer trapped in the cycle of seeking approval and suffering disappointment. We had rewritten our story not as victims of family dysfunction, but as authors of our own lives. Dad would be proud of you too, Emma said softly. For standing up for yourself. For both of us. I felt Mark's presence then, in the gentle breeze and the colors of the sunset. He had always seen what I couldn't: my strength, my worth, the courage I didn't know I possessed. I think you're right, I replied. I think he would. Sometimes the strongest act of love isn't holding on, it's setting boundaries. Sometimes the most powerful form of forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering and choosing to move forward anyway. And sometimes the most important family isn't the one you're born into, it's the one you create through honesty, respect, and unwavering support. Emma and I learned these truths together, through pain and tears and, ultimately, growth. The inheritance Mark left wasn't just money in a trust fund, it was the courage to stand up for what's right, even when standing alone. That's the true legacy I'll pass on to my daughter, a wealth more valuable than any dollar amount could ever be.